Yeah, so Professor Raj Reddy, Professor Balki, Mr. Sani, and all the people who have been associated with Digital Library of India. Uh, so I will talk a little bit about the push that it created for technology development. But first, so this was a pioneering effort. It started in 2003 in India as a project funded at IIT Bangalore by the Principal Scientific Advisor to Government of India. And very quickly, it became a national project in 2004 and spread to many, many institutions under the Ministry of Electronics and IT. Of course, the goal was to make Indian language books available to all, and not just Indian language books, but any language books which are of interest to India. The major coordinating centers when it started, of course, was IIT Bangalore and IIIT Hyderabad. I happened to be the director of IIIT Hyderabad at that time. When the scanners arrived, I think this was in 2004 or 5, and a mega center was set up for scanning. So as these scanners arrived and they were set up, it was really a massive operation. And it was not just massive in terms of physical scanning. It required coordination with various libraries who were reluctant in lending their books or getting them scanned. So the project also adopted a strategy that you don't have to send books. If you are a large center, we will send the scanners to you. And Professor Raj Reddy worked with the center, with the heads of the city central library, the state central library, and so on, and various other libraries. And the scanners were taken there, and the scanning was done right sitting in those libraries. And it gave comfort to people. But the most important thing was that the scanning happened. Now, while doing scanning, the quality control had to be maintained, that the quality was good, metadata was put in properly, and all these things were managed and done while expanding at the same time. So when it started in Hyderabad, already the work was, people were being contacted in Andhra Pradesh and outside. So all this was a massive in terms of its coordination that was required. And it was done by the team led by Professor Raj Reddy, and who met from chief minister downwards, whoever, so to make sure that this happens and succeeds. Now, as the digitization of books takes place, it opens up many more possibilities. It no longer remains only a book to be read, but that book somehow achieves or reaches an active life of its own. The book becomes searchable. So what was earlier a printed book now has become a searchable book. A multimodality, a book which is printed can suddenly now start speaking. It can become an audio book. A book printed in one language can be translated into other languages much more easily and multilingual. So therefore, people who know other languages can now access that book. And of course, in time to come, many more things I know will happen in terms of creating summaries of books, chapters of articles, question answering, and who knows what not. Now, as things expand, it is not just books, but also spoken lectures, films, uh, pictures in JPG format or whatever. And all these things now become part of a universal library. And that was the conception that Professor Raj Reddy had. So what started, the journey may have started with a book, but the vision was not just books, but material in all kinds of forms. So this makes it very obvious that to be able to do these other things, it would require the development of language technology. But before we go to language technology, let us see the Indian scenario. There are 22 official languages of India, and they are mandated by the Schedule 8 of the Constitution of India, which means the governments are bound to support and supply material in the official languages. Actual languages in use are somewhere around 1,000 languages. There was a People's Linguistic Survey of India that was conducted over a period of, I think, around 10 years, started around 2010. And that itself documented some 780 or 800 languages, and there were more. So exact number is not known, but it is 900 plus languages, or 950 or 60 plus languages. If you look at the top languages in terms of numbers of speakers, there are 6 languages in this order in terms of number of people. Hindi is spoken by 500 million people in the world, and some of these languages are spoken by more than 100 million people. One language which is not listed here is Punjabi, which, if you include Pakistan and India, perhaps it would be the third most spoken language out of these 6 plus 1, 7 languages. So Punjabi also should be added here if you look at the world languages. And these languages, the material which is available in these languages on the net is unfortunately limited. It is still not at the scale where it should be. So the Digital Library of India took the first step in making the images available. And as the images become available, one can then slowly convert them into text form as OCRs are developed. So we come back to the technology issue. So the technology scene, so with the arrival of with the starting of the Digital Library of India project, the Ministry of Electronics and IT also expanded its program. This was a program on technology development for Indian languages. I cannot say this was the only reason for expansion, but certainly Digital Library of India was a major factor. It was in 2006 that 5 research consortia were formed and 5 research projects were launched. And one of them was on optical character recognition, then machine translation, of which there were 2 major subparts, English to Indian languages and Indian languages to Indian languages, then cross-lingual information retrieval, online handwriting recognition, and a couple of years later, the speech processing, which started a little late. So these consortia projects were launched, and in particular for optical character recognition, this was a gold mine, because suddenly a huge amount of material was already available in scanned form. Now, what was needed to be done at that time was keying in of selected parts of these pages, of these images. And once you do that, then you train the machine to start giving you a working optical character recognizer, and then start running it on the other pages of books with similar fonts and so on. At that time, the OCR was dependent on the font, and with a different font, the error rates would go up. So various things were done, and OCRs which were developed at that time, they in fact became successful. And this is something which may not find a retail market, but it was extremely important in running them over DLI books, and the output would become available to lakhs and millions of users. I know that there was also an effort with Professor Jawahar at IIIT Hyderabad, Professor Shantanu Chaudhary at IIT Delhi at that time. They also worked on word spotting, where without converting into character form, you spot the word by matching images. And this turned out to be rather successful for search, even though OCR character recognition still had errors. So the point is that even when you have a OCR working with some accuracy, you can make the book searchable, and as a result of the search, you can show them back the original images which will not have errors. However, as your recognition accuracy goes up, and in time to come, all this material which is in image form can be converted into text form. Similarly, for machine translation, many of these books, and Dr. Shukla mentioned about the the children's book, the National Book Trust, which is a national book agency which produces books in all Indian languages. So their material, some of it was, the later attempt was to get it in born digital form, but otherwise, whatever material, whatever books they had published earlier, they were scanned, and using their parallel translations of the same book, parallel corpora were created. And this became very important for machine learning, particularly for statistical machine translation in those years. Then cross-lingual information retrieval also benefited a lot from the data that became available because of DLI. Online handwriting recognition was slightly different game, and speech processing, although it started little later, but today we can see that the development of the text to speech would convert these books into audiobooks. It would be possible to take these books, which were originally images, convert them into text form, and after that machine translation, cross-lingual information retrieval, and text to speech as audiobooks. So the technology opens up enormous possibilities with the availability of data in large amounts. The consortia actually yielded field level systems, and by 2012 there was a push to make them available. There was even a CS Communications of ACM 2010 article on the work done in India on technology for Indian languages. But unfortunately, at that time, the market was not ready. Most people were still in the older age when the material was not available. Their own documents, their own materials were mostly in paper form. So a suitable market wasn't there. And the ecosystem of startups and dynamic companies which would take this very new technology and work patiently with users and supply them, that was not quite ready. So the technology that was developed at that stage did not reach mass markets. However, the work that was done at that time, continued, and then people kept working on them. And today we have reached a stage where some of these things are reaching the market. Now, more recently, major new mission projects have been announced. There's a new mission on speech-to-speech machine translation. And I would say partly because of DLI, Digital Library of India, OCR was made an integral part of the mission, because it was realized that even though the mission may be on speech-to-speech, very large amount of images exist because of DLI, and those images should be converted to text so that machine translation can be in use, and also the audiobooks. So even later, more recently, this has been recognized that this is a very important part. Of course, those are the early years, and if I look at today, the scenario seems very different. There are smartphones, hundreds of millions of smartphones, and an unprecedented amount of content. So this reminds me of the jet aeroplane. So if you look at two images of the aircraft, the first aircraft, 1903 by Wright brothers, made up of canvas and wood, and a modern jet aircraft, gleaming new machine, which can carry hundreds of passengers. And if you look at the two, then you say, oh, look at that. And in one of my classes, I presented this picture to the students, and I asked them, which one do you think was more difficult to build? The first plane, which was made up of cloth and wood, and perhaps having a motorcycle engine, and a modern jet aircraft with turbines and jet engines, and all kinds of comforts inside. And of course, there was no doubt the majority of the students said it was that first pioneer aircraft that was so hard to build. And when I see today, and certainly 20 years later now, in the future, when people will look at, all perhaps smartphones with even smarter insides, at that time, when you would compare the digital library 20 years later or 50 years later, and the effort that took place in 2003 in India, starting at that time, then clearly, then people will imagine how difficult it must have been to do that first task. And it provided this pioneering role that the Digital Library of India played. It provided the early experience with all stages of library and converting things into digital library. It exposed hundreds of librarians to what it meant to deal with the digital library. And I think it opened up imagination of all of us. And today, DLI lives on as a part of the National Digital Library of India. So I'll stop here. Thank you.